This is 15 Minutes of Impact from the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the podcast series on permitting reforms, my guest is former Federal Energy Regulatory Commission Chair James Hoecker, the founder and head of the Rail-Grid Collaborative. Jim's going to talk about how the rights of way along roadways and rail lines would be used to build new transmission while minimizing today's permitting logjam. Jim was the Clinton appointed chair of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, from 1993 to 2001. Since then, he served as an energy sector attorney and is currently legal counsel with Powerhouse DC law firm Hush Blackwell. So, Jim, reforming permitting practices to enable transmission expansion is right now the hottest topic on Capitol Hill, besides some other things in the headlines that don't fall under the purview of this podcast. So before we talk about your quite unique proposals, just let's talk a minute about why are reforms of federal permitting practices so urgently needed? What's causing the permitting delays?
Well, good to see you, Herman. It's a delight to be here. I think that permitting and siting reform is cuts across so many different aspects of infrastructure, not just energy, but lots of different kinds of economically critical infrastructure that um, it's not difficult for people from different backgrounds, different parties, with different priorities to support moving regulation along, making it more efficient. And whereas targeting um, uh, things like NEPA for
National
streamlining
Environmental
of
Policy,
reform.
the National Environmental Policy Act
Yes,
that requires so many environmental assessments and statements, right? That's what you're talking about, reforms.
exactly. It's a very important and well-intended statute, but it has grown a lot of barnacles over the years. And I think, regardless of which side of the aisle you're on or what agency you're administering, it's important that that government and environmental reviews that it does be as efficient and streamlined as possible, and not impose unnecessary costs on consumers, which it may tend to do. We're all
Yeah,
familiar with with multi-volume, 1,000 pages of environmental impact statements, and I think it's a pastime for those to be reassessed. There is a panoply of uncoordinated legislative mandates that have accumulated over the years that apply to energy infrastructure, whether it's NEPA or scenic rivers restrictions, endangered species. The list is very long, and it's um, it's um, 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 it's cumulative, but it's never been coordinated. And I'm personally very happy to see that being reassessed. Although I do think that these are critically important statutes for the environment. They just need to work better.
exactly. Yeah, I've actually read that the people who put in place the original NEPA legislation thought of them as something that would take a year, maybe 2 years of work and maybe produce a report of 100, 150 pages. But like you say, I mean, when I was looking at the Transwest Express transmission system uh, years ago, 10, 15 years ago, and the SunZia project in the Southwest, the NEPA work was volumes, like you say. It was daunting.
Yeah,
But that's, go ahead, go ahead.
and as projects like those bump up against various kinds of interests, even the Department of Defense and so forth, they run a ground on some important federal and national environmental and other kinds of priorities, and that all needs to be dealt with. So
Yeah, and
it,
go
it's
ahead.
it's it's very important that these laws be crafted in a way that makes them work better, um, because we don't want those mandates to go away entirely.
Right, exactly. As you say, it's not that there's a disregard for the environment, but that's not really what we're here to talk about. What we're here to talk about is a great solution that you've been working on for some time. You're advocating for using existing rights of way to expand transmission because that way you don't have as much permitting red tape. The rights of way already exist. So why would that minimize or circumvent the permitting logjam in detail? Before we talk about specifics, just what is it about existing rights of way? How does that reduce the red tape? And by the way, you were FERC chair. Does this recent, really important Order 1920 play a role in taking advantage of existing rights of way?
Well, you've opened many doors there. I think that
Have a
you know,
tendency to do that.
although we probably should have seen this coming, and for the last 30 years, maybe even since Order 888 back in '96, um, the demand for more transmission and for a more integrated grid is now become very obvious and very scary. I mean, we need to double the transmission capacity. We need to replace a lot of antiquated equipment. We need to make the grid more integrated. It certainly has become more so regionally, but we need to think about this as a national asset as well. So this is, I don't know if this represents a failure of industrial policy in the U.S., but we are very far away from meeting what everybody expects the needs to be in 2050, and 2050 is coming up. So it's critical that we get moving. There's a lot of talk about permitting and siting reform, and we have talked about better regulation and um, uh, grid enhancing technologies and doing DLR and so
Dynamic line readings.
right, and we can, there are lots of ways that we can improve how the grid operates. Um, One thing that, and we've already talked about permitting statutes and environmental statutes.
But if you use these existing rights of way, could you just run the lines right along the highway just or very, we all have already have traffic jams as they're doing highway improvements. Could they just bury lines right next to the highway and then you wouldn't have any permitting? Is that the way it would work?
Well, the thing that is getting some attention now, and I have to thank you and Utility Dive for that, is are these existing rights of way, and it could be railroad rights of way, highway rights of way, existing transmission rights of way, even pipeline rights of way, and
Oh, yeah.
other kinds of uh, corridors that uh, don't represent disturbance of new um, greenfield. They're affectionately called brownfield projects, but the fact is that you can, uh, depending on individual circumstances, you can develop infrastructure within these corridors and conceivably do it much faster because there's less impact and the a lot of the statutes that might otherwise apply, including the possibility of eminent domain, would be less of a factor in building these projects. But to answer your question, Herman, uh, just because you have an existing railroad or highway right of way doesn't mean that you just go ahead and build it um, and assume that there's no impact at all. There could be important impacts and commercial barriers that you'd have to overcome anyway.
Mm,
These are individual, very fact-specific kinds of considerations, but it's an opportunity that is largely unexploited.
mm,
And that's why I'm glad to hear people talking about it. Um, we've gotten way too far down the road of needing a revitalization of the grid before we got to talk about this particular subject. I have filed a lot of comments at DOE and FERC advocating that they think about this in the context of Order 1890 and in the context of the national interest electric transmission corridors, and unfortunately both agencies have been entirely mute on existing rights of way. So
do you have any
that's too
do you have
bad.
any thoughts about do you have any thoughts about why that they've been mute? It seems like it seems like such a no-brainer to some people. Maybe we don't understand all the technicalities, but it a lot of these rail lines, for instance, are privately owned rights of way, aren't they? So they could kind of do, I don't know if I want to say, I don't want to say anything they want on them, but certainly they could have a lot of leverage in the decision-making process. So why are the agencies, do you have any thoughts? I mean, maybe I'm going, I don't want to
Well,
talk about
yeah,
the,
I can't speak for, for those for the lack of a response. I mean, be nice to have a conversation with them about it, but we've been unsuccessful to date. Now that may change, and if they listen to you, Herman, then maybe that'll improve the environment. But uh, I think that it's just not obvious. Congress instructed DOE, for example, to develop national interest corridors for transmission. And DOE looked at it in the context of where is the congestion greatest. And we've gone down that path for the last 20 years with backstop siting and national interest corridors. Um, Politically developed solutions, concocted mechanisms by Congress that don't necessarily get the job done. And you're right, it seems pretty obvious. I have to say that there are possible limitations on those approaches, but I think it's important that number one, that an integrated transmission system strong enough to provide the reliability and resilience needs and economic benefits to the public that we require and are going to continue to see grow. Um, but that have certain built-in problems in terms of their expansion. So as our need grows, we need to be more creative, and this is one area that I think we I hesitate to call it a no-brainer, but
yeah,
I do think it's pretty obvious that as transmission becomes more important, that we get more creative. And here is our two kinds of, speaking of highways and railroad rights of way, two kinds of brownfield, linear brownfield assets that could be exploited for the public good. Now, there are, you know, as in everything, there are things that can and can't happen as a result. Did I lose you, Herman?
no, 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 we're here.
Oh, I see. Your picture just disappeared here.
Oh,
Um, well, that's okay. Um, let me see if
well, let me ask you this, Jim, because I want to move on to something else related to this. But did I looked and it didn't seem that Order 1920 addressed this option at all. Am I right about that? Or before we move on, just briefly, did it, or did I miss something in looking into that?
no, that's not surprising. In the sense that they're talking about uh, FERC's traditional function as a regulator of utilities that plan this, including the RTOs, that plan the expansion of the grid or the upgrade of the grid. Siting is historically a state function. Uh,
Okay.
and But I think that uh, having if we I guess what I was about to say earlier is that if transmission is becoming so important, we need to have a pronounced national policy and national strategy based around economic strength, based around decarbonization, based around better reliability and so forth, um, uh, that has a uh, strong integrated grid as national policy. Likewise, we should make sure that we use all the possible avenues to develop that grid. And what we're talking about today are two, what I think are two critical aspects of that. Uh,
Yeah, but then the Department of Energy's National Transmission Planning Study and other studies have shown that there's a need for 75,000 miles or more of new expanded transmission. And that's what you've been stressing here. What I'd like to know from your point of view, how much potential transmission do these existing rights of way offer? Have you done any kind of calculations? And along those lines, I think it's an important question to ask also, can using those existing rights of way save electricity customers money, or do they come with their own kinds of costly complications? So, how much potential is there, and can they save electricity users money?
well, I think there are some important considerations in both those instances. Um, in the case of highways, which are ubiquitous, the interstate highway system would seem to be very easily accessed, very broad shoulders and so forth, but they're very heavily regulated. The state departments of transportation and the Federal Highway Administration have imposed restrictions on how those rights of way can be used. And although there have been some slow changes coming from, for example, the states of Minnesota and Wisconsin, that generally it's a bit of an uphill battle to eliminate those prohibitions, which are based on historical concerns about aesthetics and safety and other concerns. Similarly, railroads, which are not um, uh, you know public utilities in the truest sense, um, uh, are private property owners. They're one of some of the largest property owners in the country. You asked how much, or what the dimensions of these rights of way would be, and the railroads alone right now have 140,000 linear miles of track.
Wow.
They were 240,000 miles 100 years ago, which means there's a lot of abandoned trackage, and some of that remains available. So with uh, what is, tens of thousands of miles of rights of way, one would assume that some significant portion of that could be a prime co-location for high voltage direct current transmission, for example. Um,
Yeah.
Underground, more than likely, even above ground in some cases, if provided it doesn't interfere with railroad operations or communications, signaling, and so forth. But uh, there are, in that case, the railroads have to be a commercial partner, which could very well be to their benefit. I'm not sure they're
Sure.
exploring that very actively, but there are some examples of where we know that works quite well. And it's I think important both for the electric transmission development community and utilities uh, to become more informed as to the availability of these rights of way, and vice versa. I think
Yeah.
we're just seeing the beginning of an exploration by departments of transportation, for example, of uh,
Ah,
of what can be done in this area.
yeah. All right. Is Warren Buffett, you own rail lines. Are you listening? Jim, one quick question before we close this out. We're running a little short of time. The only project that I'm aware of that has moved ahead is the Sioux Green Link, which is a 350-mile line that would carry 2,100 megawatts of electricity and connect Iowa and Illinois. And it would connect, in a greater sense, the MISO and PJM uh, systems, which would have
Right.
much farther reach. Are is that moving ahead? Has it shown that the potential that we see in this idea is real? Are there any others that you can mention briefly as we close this conversation
Certainly,
out?
I think it is moving ahead. I think there have been some interconnection uh, debates about how this is going to enter the PJM environment, and under what set of rules. But the Sioux Green project, I think, is still expected to be energized sometime in the 29 to 30 2030 time frame. We'll see how that goes. One of the advantages of using railroad rights of way, and the Sioux Green project uses exclusively railroad rights of way, is speed of construction and delivery.
Yeah,
Um, but there's a lot of untested assumptions here, and so Sue Green, to some extent, is a bit of a guinea pig, I'm afraid. But another one I'd mention is the Champlain Hudson Power
uh,
Express, which delivers Canadian hydro from the Canadian border to Manhattan, and 100 miles is over 100 miles of that project, which is a high voltage direct current project, uh, runs along the CSX rights of way in central New York.
is that
And
moving ahead also?
I'm sorry,
Is that moving ahead also? I don't, is it in service yet?
it's coming close. I think it will be in service in the spring.
Wow,
I know that they're building their converter station in the Astoria district of New York City, and it's been kind of fun to watch. They have had, a lot of useful experience that I think the industry generally will benefit from.
that's an interesting idea because it's not all along rail lines, but it's a way to get through maybe areas that are difficult. So you
Oh,
streamline part of your
yeah, that
project.
that project is really quite quite intriguing. It crosses an international border, goes under a long lake. It is Lake Champlain.
Yeah, I remember reading
It
about it.
runs off near, along a couple of public roads and goes back under the Hudson River and into New York City. So it's quite inventive.
Great. So we've got a couple of models out there, and I think that's where we need to leave it, Jim. I want to thank you. My guest has been former Federal Energy Regulatory Commission chair and founder and head of the Rail-Grid Collaborative, James Hoecker. He's currently legal counsel to Hush Blackwell, and he's outlined an approach to expanding transmission that can avoid the current permitting logjam by using existing rights of way. And as always, our listeners, for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.